convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
All the people that have gone out there against the mainstream media and said, you're going to call us racist, you're going to call us potential Timothy McVeighs, fuck you. War.
Intensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. And obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
Oh, Sharon Stone. Poor Sharon Stone. I guess there are Sharon Stone headlines today or something. She's made some angry commie comments, and everybody is like, let's get the actress. Oh, man, we got her. All righty then. It is Wednesday, November 27th, 2024. The 1,407th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. Welcome, everybody, to the Wednesday subscriber stream. Here we are. These live streams have become maybe too normal now. And you can tell me as paid subscribers whether or not this has totally lost its luster. I mean, for all I know, maybe you guys have more fun when it's a public live stream and the chat is open and blah, blah. I don't know. You can give me your feedback on that, and I will think about that feedback and prioritize it. Happy almost Thanksgiving, everybody. I saw some happy Thanksgivings in the chat. Thank you. I hope you are all setting up for a wonderful Thanksgiving as well. I figure maybe we will start things off with the return of Kamabla. Maybe I will do it this way. Maybe, you know what? Let's just do it this way. This will be fine. The return of Kamabla. She published a video statement for some reason, or someone did, and this is either Kamabla or an AI or something. It's not really important anymore, is it? So, with no further ado, Kamabla.
Just have to remind you, don't you ever let anybody take your power from you. You have the same power that you did before November 5th. And you have the same purpose that you did. And you have the same ability to engage and inspire. So don't ever let anybody or any circumstance take your power from you.
I mean, I guess it's worth saying that it looks like she has a 5 o'clock shadow. She looks rough. And the neck thing is creepy. It's always been a little creepy. Now, I know you're not supposed to comment on a woman's physical features. And I'm not trying to objectify her. I'm just saying that this is Major League politics, is it not? Optics are part of the game. Optics might even be most of the game. The narrative, of course, is the full game, and optics are a big part of the narrative. So I don't know what this could be, what it could be intended to communicate. If it is meant to be a pro-Kamala thing, which it must be meant to be, right? It's either if Kamala Harris is filming this and these are her authentic words and it was her idea to put this video out, then she's trying to show herself in the best light. So she cares about her own optics, of course. Everyone cares about their own optics when they're doing something. I mean, I'm a pretty casual guy and I'm fine to be casual on a live stream, but I'm also not going to come in here looking like I haven't showered in 6 days. I hope I don't look like I haven't showered in 6 days. But you know what I mean, right? There's a level of presentable that you would expect someone to be in the highest levels of Major League politics. And I'm not sure that Kamala Harris is quite meeting that standard. Is she drunk in the afternoon when she's posting this? And, you know, obviously we're not going to be able to answer this, but let's just go ahead and watch it again. Now that we've, you know, talked about how it looks, let's just go for some of the content.
Just have to remind you, don't you ever let anybody take your power from you.
This is a pep talk? Is Kamala Harris giving us a pep talk? Don't ever let anybody take your power from you. I'm here to remind you that you have to hold on to your power and use your power. Whatever you can use it for. You clearly can't get me elected because I'm the most unelectable person that has ever graced professional politics. I mean, the woman got no support in the primary in 2019 and 2020 and didn't even run in a primary this time. They just installed her as candidate, quote unquote, in a fake campaign for a fake election. And it was a fake election. And we'll get back into that a little later. No one has ever liked Kamala Harris. She won an election, won a couple of elections in California, a place with the fakest elections in the country. It is not wrong to say that Kamala Harris has never been elected because California, of course, doesn't have elections. California is a captured communist state, the most communist state in a captured communist country. They don't have real elections. I mean, look at her. Sorry. Let's continue. Don't ever let anyone take your power. Who's she talking to? Communists? Her donors? The people who supported her? I mean, this is a very Obama thing to do, to pretend that you have this massive, important, connected, dialed in base that while sometimes they don't get what they want, they're still a massive majority and a moral majority, if nothing else. They, wow, man. That face, the longer you look at it, the crazier it gets. Is that Bill Clinton under there? What is going on with that face? Okay, let's keep going. No, don't say it. I know you're thinking it.
You have the same power that you did before November 5th.
Is she talking to herself in a mirror? Is this a Saturday Night Live Stuart Smalley sketch? And if you don't know who Stuart Smalley is, well, we're going to have a this is who Stuart Smalley is moment with you so that from now on, you know who Stuart Smalley is. And let's do Stuart Smalley with Michael Jordan. And I'm sorry that this is going to be maybe so long. And whoever's listening to this after, especially if it's, if it's on YouTube, well, YouTube's going to make me cut this segment out. So you're just going to have to search Stuart Smalley, Michael Jordan on that very site, YouTube, and then you will find this video and you can watch as much of it as you like after pausing my podcast, and then, come back to the podcast. Now, don't get sucked down a YouTube rabbit hole where you don't come back to the podcast, because that's not going to be good for you or anyone, not me either. Well, I don't really care. You do what you want, but I don't think it'll be good. Anyway.
Yeah.
So that is Stuart Smalley, and Brain Strain again in the chat rightly points out that Kamala Harris not only seems like the Stuart Smalley sketch on Saturday Night Live, she also did a very similar sketch on Saturday Night Live. And here is that.
South Asian woman running for president, preferably from the Bay Area.
Oh, it's just awful. Make it stop, please. Make it stop. Okay, so amazing. Kamala is going through multiple levels of showbiz inception. And you'll notice that in that Saturday Night Live clip, Kamala Harris looks much better because she's lit much better. Maybe it's her makeup. I don't know what it is. I'm just saying that in the video she released, her comeback video, no one's heard from her in like 3 weeks. Her comeback video is, she looks terrible. Sorry. She looks terrible. Anyway, she was saying that you still have as much power as you did before November 5th. Now, is she looking in the mirror saying that to herself? You still have as much power as you did before November 5th. Now, that is absolutely correct. The amount of power she had before November 5th was zero power. The amount of power she has right now since November 5th is also zero power. So the same amount. Now, if you're a normie and you think that Kamala Harris really is a vice president with real vice presidential authority, despite the last 4 years of watching Kamala Harris pretend to be vice president, well, then the truth is she still has just as much power as she did the day before, because she was just fake vice president. But if she was the real vice president, hey, she's still the real vice president, which means that she has political people around her taking care of the things that she says, writing her statements, putting together the optics so she doesn't look terrible. And apparently all those people no longer work for her because she does look terrible. And all of this is moronic. Now, you might just be fine with the surface level analysis that says she's just putting out a message to her supporters. How many supporters does she have? Not very many. But I guess she's putting out a message to them. You still have as much power as you had before. How much power did Kamala Harris's supporters have before? Well, if you're on Blue Sky, for instance, maybe you have quite a bit of power because everybody on there is a Kamala Harris supporter. But if everybody in the same place has power for having the same identity, well, then it's going to stratify after that. So there's probably not too many of them over there with much power. They don't have any power on Twitter. They get laughed at in person, except in certain circles where everyone is alike. And then once again, it stratifies. So where is the place that Kamala Harris supporters would have all this power, the same power that they had before? Oh, yeah, it's in the streets. Who is she talking to? She must be talking to the most committed operatives in the movement, if she is talking to anyone. And those would, of course, be the BLM Antifa types, the people who work for NGOs, the people who work for like the Sunrise Movement, these types of left-wing activist organizations that are funded by global philanthropists and I guess act as commie activists and agitators and organizers act. So is she talking to them? Well, I don't know how she could be talking to anyone else. So potentially she wants them to take some sort of action or stand at the ready? Why isn't she treating them like the Proud Boys and asking them to stand back and stand by? I really, really do not know what this is all about, but let's go ahead and continue with Kamala's statement.
And you have the same purpose that you did. And you have the same ability to engage and inspire. So don't ever let anybody or any circumstance take your power from you.
Man, is that Michael Robinson in whiteface? Really got to wonder what is going on here. And I saw a good Big Mike video earlier that had Big Mike at his big Mikeyest. And so let me see if I can find this, because it really is something. I could not believe it. Okay, it's not under Michelle. Let's see if it's under Obama. Gosh, it's not under Obama either. Is it under Big Mike? Well, you know, I guess it's just going to disappear into the ether and I will never, ever find it. But gosh, the weird finger thing like this, where she's pointing, but not pointing. It's that, you know, politician gesture. We're told that's how they're supposed to do things with
Purpose that you did. And you have the same ability to engage and inspire. So don't ever let anybody or any circumstance take your power from you.
I mean, the facial expressions and the body language feels very Big Mikey-ian to me. And I guess I'm just not going to be able to prove that in any way. So I'm going to have to let it go. Or we can continue to talk about it. What a disaster. What a disaster that little video was. Anyone who supported Kamala and sees that video is probably, maybe it's just meant to help let them down easy, or hey, maybe Kamala Harris is coming back into the public spotlight in some sort of way. You know, there's always been talk, we've talked about it on this show, about there potentially being some invalidation of this election, because of course it was not an election. All they would have to do is prove that and then argue convincingly that it wasn't an election at all. And then Donald Trump would simply have to say, fair enough, I agree with you. That was not an election. Let's have a new election under these better terms, and maybe we'll go that direction. Who knows? The messaging from Con Inc. and from, you know, the people who are kind of MAGA or MAGA adjacent today was a little strange. Jack Posobiec, there's an op about swatting and harassment of potential Trump administration figures. Maybe it's real, maybe it's not. But he said this today, and he's kind of one of those narrative leaders on all the platforms, from the most MAGA like Truth Social, Telegram, etc., all the way to X, where he kind of builds the MAGA narrative for Con Inc. influencer normies. He said the Democrats are clearly trying to knife Kamala so she can't run again. That's why they are revealing that she never led in the polls, and why they let her do that drunk video last night. So it is just supposed to be accepted that this was a drunk video. Kamala was doing her own influencing. That's clearly not possible, because Kamala Harris is not filming herself. That shot was set up. I mean, unless Kamala is just trying to be a political influencer at this point, there's no way that she did that herself. So her team went along with her in doing that. Now, are they just following Kamala's orders? I mean, the Posobiec thing doesn't really make sense. Who's worried about Kamala running again? You know, this is like when Con Inc. talks about who's going to be president in 2028. Who cares? That's not a discussion for now. That's a discussion for, at best, late 2027. All right? It's not a discussion for now. Who cares? You're just playing fantasy sports with something 4 years in the future. Why? It's worthless. So nobody's trying to make sure that Kamala can't run again unless there's another election soon. Now, will that election be fake? Will it be real? Who's to say? There's no reason to believe that a real election could be held. We didn't have a real election 3 weeks ago. Why would we think that we're in a better position to have a real election now? And I apologize for the weird video effect that is happening as a result of the sun. I do not control the sun. So unfortunately, there's nothing I can do about that. But let's continue, because there was another element to that post, and that was the polls that he's referring to. Let's check in with former Obama hack David Plouffe. David Plouffe was the guy who was running the Center for Tech and Civic Life, or whatever it was that was the outgrowth of that. I cannot remember exactly. Let me just look it up so that I don't have to mislead anyone who's listening later on the audio and might be like, what are you saying? What Facebook linked organization did David Plouffe work for during the 2020 election cycle? It was the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, where he served as the president of policy and advocacy. And his role involved leading efforts that included significant funding for various initiatives aimed at voter mobilization and election integrity, wink, wink, particularly through partnerships with nonprofits like the Center for Tech and Civic Life. There you go. Also a board member and strategist for Acronym, a digital consulting firm focused on progressive political campaigns. They played a crucial role in opposing Donald Trump's reelection by implementing digital strategies to engage voters. This, according to Perplexity AI. So here is that man, David Plouffe. Oh, he also wrote the book about the strategy to defeat Donald Trump in the 2020 election. And in that book, he made it very clear that if the Democrats were able to get 65 to 70 million votes, they should be able to defeat Donald Trump. And then we were told that they got 81 million. Gosh, David Plouffe must have done his job so well to create 81 million real lawful American votes. But here is Plouffe from, I guess, this morning or maybe last night.
We got in, my recollection is some of that snapback, but we were behind. I mean, I think it surprised people because there was these public polls that came out in late September, early October, showing us with leads that we never saw. I mean, it was just basically a race that in the battlegrounds was 46-47, 47-48. So that's not where we started. We started behind. She was able to climb out. I think even after the debate, we might have gained, 0.51. It wasn't a race that moved a lot. And so I think when you think about our own internal analytics, if you have Wisconsin at 47-47, or Pennsylvania 48-47 Trump, let's say, which I think is where we had it at the end, you've got to have undecided break your way more than your opponents, and you've got to get a little benefit from turnout, which we weren't able to do.
So David Plouffe admitting that there were never polls showing Kamala ahead. None of their internals ever showed that. They always knew they had an uphill battle, even though it was still just within 1% or 2% in these swing states. And Poso's out there sharing this. And I've never really had a problem with Jack Posobiec, but at some point you got to start drawing the line with these people. And the idea that this is somehow owning Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris never led for even a moment. But here, look at this commie admit the truth about Kamala Harris's campaign. Well, if he's admitting the truth right now, he's talking about fake polls and a fake election. And the results of those polls, their internals at least, being accurate somehow, and us being a 50-50 country, the election being really close in the swing states, and the election results actually representing the will of the American people, the expressed will of the American people. They don't accurately reflect the will and intent of the American voter whatsoever. And of course, neither do the polls. So what is the purpose of sending this around? I really, I don't like, I even have kind of an affinity for Poso. I think he's kind of funny, like a comical character. I know that he's disseminating a narrative. I'm more focused on what the narrative is that he's disseminating because he gets a lot of eyes, and he gets a lot of eyes from certain people. So I can know when they're seeing what Poso posts, well, that's getting into the mix of their mentality. Like all those conning normies, the DeSantis, Simpson, whatever, they'll be Poso friendly. And people like Cernovich will follow Poso and think that Poso's like got his finger on the pulse of MAGA, as Cernovich represents himself having. So I know that what Poso's saying and doing is entering into the thought patterns of these people. And I want to know how that plays with the other things that they're thinking and expressing and the information sources that they're taking in. Okay. That's like a thought experiment that I go through. And I do that with a number of different people who represent different narratives because I want to know what they're saying and who they're speaking to so that I can know those people are being exposed to those narratives and those ideas. So I follow them, I pay attention to them, and I don't think too many bad things. Although I know that a lot of the Q followers think that Poso's a shill and whatever, and that the Q drops say Poso bad and therefore Poso bad and whatever. Okay. But this is just adversarial propaganda produced by Obama hacks. This guy was also a Kamala hack, of course. And he's saying that the race was always close from when they got in and they just weren't able to turn it around. And that is supposed to make us think, oh, this is such good news. Look at them admit that Kamala was never ahead. That's how landslidey it was. Well, what he just expressed supports all of the regime and all of the uniparty narratives that keep people divided, keep people thinking that their political problem is actually all of their neighbors with the wrong signs on their yards. And I'm not saying that those people aren't any part of the problem, but they're not the main problem. The main problem is the uniparty. The main problem is the propaganda. And all of this supports the uniparty and its mission and the propaganda and its mission. So why is it good to pretend that David Plouffe is being honest here? He's not being honest here. These are the people who steal elections. Gosh, man, it's really crazy. It really is crazy. And I don't mean to harp on this stuff too much. I know that some people in the audience are like, you got to let this stuff go. No, I don't. That is the wrong idea to have. You let this stuff go, you stay here forever. People didn't want to get the hose. They wanted to vote hard. And so they haven't yet gotten the hose. And if you don't get the hose at some point, then you haven't noticed the problem. The problem hasn't affected you. And when you're saying ignore problems like election fraud, well, that's you supporting the system. And the system is only going back to the place that it was. Okay. Those problems haven't been corrected. And it's just going to keep going down that path. And it can keep going down that path even while everybody knows that Donald Trump is the president. That is actually possible. It's especially possible if the people Donald Trump relies on, his own base, to help push his agenda forward, all go back to sleep because they think they won, because they were told that Donald Trump won in a landslide and therefore the elections are legitimate. People used to get really mad at me when I would talk about Joe Rogan, because Joe Rogan is our hero. Joe Rogan has the biggest podcast in the world, and thank goodness he does, because he's using that podcast to wake up the normies. And if Joe Rogan didn't use that podcast to wake up the normies, well, the normies would never awake. And we're just going to keep saying that about all the people we can't let go of until we ourselves are repeating the same thing they're all repeating, which is we have to wait to wake up the normies. Joe Rogan is waking up the normies. Tucker Carlson and Dan Bongino are waking up the normies, and soon they'll be awake. Well, if we're all repeating the same thing that all the normies in their audience are repeating, thinking that they're the awake ones, well, then we all become the normies. Look at Elon Musk responding to a post from Autism Capital. This is yesterday. And I don't have Twitter. If someone wants to pull up that Autism Capital post and drop it in the chat, you're more than welcome. And then we will watch the video there. But otherwise, Autism Capital is saying, Joe Rogan, quoting Joe Rogan, we are very fortunate. After the election, I'm like, wow, Voting works. That's nice. They don't have the system completely rigged yet. End quote. Elon Musk responds, ha ha, not quite 100% rigged yet. Laughing face emoji. So there's Joe Rogan putting the normies back to sleep. How about that? And you know who covered that? Because this actually wasn't the first time Rogan has said this, although I missed it a couple of weeks ago. So this is the Daily Beast from November 7th, a couple days after the election. Joe Rogan shocked Trump won. Turns out voting works. The Daily Beast and the rest of the mainstream media are promoting Joe Rogan, saying that voting works. Why would the Daily Beast be reporting about Joe Rogan? Isn't that amazing? So we don't need to go through this article, but let's listen to Rogan in that clip from a couple of weeks ago, from almost 3 weeks ago, right after the election.
So turns out voting works. It's real. As much as we fucking thought they had it rigged, as much as we thought there was shenanigans and bullshit, and it's just a puppet show, and there's no way anybody could buck the system. Turns out voting is still real.
At least partially.
At least if it's too big to rig.
Yes.
And clearly he was too big to rig.
Yeah. Wasn't it? It was crazy because it was like for weeks, especially in the close of the campaign, it was one of those things where it felt like it almost felt like 2008 when Obama was running against McCain, and it was just so obvious Obama was running away with this. Everything you could see and observe, his crowd sizes, the enthusiasm, the culture, it was all behind him. But at that time, the polls were reflecting what you saw everywhere. Obama's up big. He's about to. John McCain's not going to win after 8 years of George W. Bush. The country doesn't want another war hawk. They want this, articulate young peace guy.
Right.
And it was like that with Trump, where it's like all the signs are that he's clearly running away with this. But then every single poll told you, no, this is the closest election of your lifetime. And then it was just, there was a very interesting feeling to see it and be like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy. I was observing all the things I was observing.
Do you know what Trump told me about the polls?
No, what?
He's like, they're bullshit. They don't do anything. You give them money, they come back, they have these results. You don't know.
He was like, they charge 500 grand for,
he's right.
Yeah.
He's right. And the media gaslit us to the absolute limits of their ability. The absolute limits. Joy Reid spent the entire time she was discussing Trump the other day comparing him to Mussolini, Stalin, Hitler, talking about a right-wing authoritarian regime, as if he had never been president for 4 years and didn't behave like any of those things.
Yeah.
As if the economy wasn't booming, as if people weren't making more money, as if we weren't involved in any new conflicts overseas, no new wars.
I mean, I could point to a lot of things Trump did in his 4 years that I think were bad, but they were things that were similar to Obama and Bush. And
Guess
you know what I mean? It wasn't
bet
different.
He could point to them too. You know, when I talked to him about what it was like to actually govern for the first time ever, it's a daunting task. He was telling me about the thousands and thousands of appointments he had to make, thousands of people he had to pick. He didn't know who any of these people were. He had to trust people that he knew, and he didn't know who was telling him the truth and who was just trying to get the system moving along in the exact same direction. And he got bogged down with a lot of that shit. It took forever for them to weed it out, which is the crazy thing about being president. It's the hardest job on the planet, and you start it without any knowledge of it.
All right, there is the genius Joe Rogan waking up the normies. Waking up the normies to the fact that our elections are not rigged. Elections work. Voting works. Look what happened. This is the regime's worst nightmare, except it's not the regime's worst nightmare. Dave Smith, not that he knows what he's saying because he's another normie, but he's like, all the signs show that Donald Trump was going to win, just like kind of everybody knew that Obama had the country's support in some sense in 2008. The culture had shifted in a direction and people could sense that. That's what happened to Donald Trump. So it was narratively too big to rig. There was no way that they would be able to explain any outcome other than Donald Trump winning. I've been saying that for a year. And what did I say was going to happen? As a result of that, the regime's best case scenario would be to say that Donald Trump won by a small amount and then rig the races down ballot so that they could subvert Donald Trump's administration in whatever way possible. You work to delegitimize and disqualify him before ever allowing him to stage an inauguration, which he doesn't need to do because he didn't lose in 2020 and he didn't walk away. But the point is what the public actually believes, because the people's minds need to be right for the mission to be accomplished. People need to be okay with what must be done. And instead, they're moving back to being okay with the way things were. And the way things were is with the regime in full control of all these aspects of their lives. And Trump alone can't just wave a magic wand and save them. Now, if Trump is able to take out all of the executive branch agencies and with the Supreme Court dismantle the fullness of the federal bureaucracy, that will be wonderful as far as our government goes. But our government is not the only part of society. And as we've seen over and discussed over the last couple of months, even when the regime doesn't have the people on its side or the president on its side, or even the military on its side, in some countries, they will announce that there is a different leader in those countries, as they did with Venezuela, with Juan Guaido, and as they do elsewhere, where they just totally ignore the president and focus on who the prime minister is, or ignore the prime minister and focus on who the president is, or ignore the kind of civilian government in total and just focus on who the monarch is, who has the final say. Because we still have monarchies. People pretend that's not something that is real in life now, but there are still royal families in parts of Europe and elsewhere, and in the Middle East. We're like, oh, the age of monarchs, that was the Middle Ages, that was the Dark Ages. No, it's right now still. And hey, man, maybe we'll go back to some version of the Dark Ages. And you got to think we were probably lied to quite a bit about what the Dark Ages are in compared to what this Enlightenment is. But Joe Rogan is waking up the normies by putting them back to sleep, apparently. And, you know, to the extent that that video also has Rogan repeating those same comments, well, that's him saying those same comments at two different points, weeks apart. He's still saying that elections work. What could be worse to convince the country of at this point than elections working? It is blatantly, overtly, obviously supporting the regime system and the uniparty apparatus. There's a reason the man gets paid $100 million a year from Spotify. It's not because he's some special agent that's out there running a patriot info op so perfectly designed that he just happens to disseminate the totality of the regime narrative while occasionally giving people reason to doubt little pieces of it, but never actually destroying it. And then just focusing on aliens. At some point, you just gotta, I mean, you know, again, could I be wrong about my interpretation of these people? Yes, I could. Maybe it is some elaborate info op, so elaborate and well directed and managed that it's indetectable or undetectable. Sorry. And if that is the truth, then I will say, hey, Joe Rogan, you know what? You seem like a hell of a guy. I guess, you know, I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. You were right. I was wrong. You were doing something I couldn't tell. I wasn't willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. And for that, I'm sorry, Joe Rogan. If it ever comes to that, I am more than happy to say all those things. It still hasn't come to that. It's weeks after the election now. The problems aren't solved. All that we've been doing for 3 weeks is applauding the announcements of who the fantasy picks are. And again, that's not a slight to Donald Trump. That is a slight to how we view our government, that the solutions must still come from government and that we need to cheer on federal bureaucrats as they get nominated to office. That's what communists do. They're like, yes, please fill out the full bureaucracy with our favorite people. Oh, God, it's so great when you nominate a new bureaucrat. What are we doing? Honestly, what are we doing? It's absolute madness that we have spent 3 weeks applauding bureaucrats being named to offices that are, in many cases, totally unconstitutional and should not exist. What are we doing? What are we doing? That is what communists do. How are we to distinguish ourselves from communists if we are cheering on bureaucrats as they enter unconstitutional positions within an unconstitutionally large federal government that has already overthrown the Constitution? And these people are only being seen as legitimately entering these offices as the result of a fake election in the first place. What is the difference at that point between us, MAGA, America First, patriots, and people who are groveling before a communist administrative state? Honestly. And, you know, again, I understand that I am preaching to the choir here. I really do. Because you guys are clearly not the ones who are the most susceptible to this problem. This is not a problem primarily exhibited by my audience, but it is a problem nonetheless. I posted this on Truth and Telegram earlier. Elections aren't real. If no one had turned out, the system would have produced equivalent results and people would have believed everyone else must have turned out. We're busy patting ourselves on the back and talking about the fantasy team Trump is assembling for season 3 of The Apprentice Trump administration, cheering for bureaucrats to serve as the heads of unconstitutional big government agencies is literally what communists do, especially when they're placed in their positions as the result of a fake election. You are not raging against the machine by demanding that your solutions come from government and rejoicing as your favorite TV characters become your rulers. We are in preposterous land. It is absolutely crazy. So we still have the illegitimate government. We are told that we are now going to command that illegitimate government, even though none of us are actually demanding anything like that. We're just applauding the television as we're told that Trump has chosen a person to fix XYZ problems for us. So we're not actually demanding anything. We're already totally content with the election results as they were delivered to us. We are happy that the people who are waking up the normies are now telling the normies that elections are just fine. And then we have the losing candidate telling her support base, not us, that they should just keep going, that their work is as important as it ever was. They're not losing any power. They have the same power now that they had before November 5th, which legitimately is no power because, of course, Kamala was never a candidate, never had real support, and was never a real vice president. None of it. But they're still going to have just as much power. So I want to spend some time today talking about another post of mine from Truth Social. And this is that post. I thought I had pulled up the wrong post. So what if all the executive branch agencies simply privatize themselves and continue to do the same work with the same regime funding sources, the banks, the philanthropists, etc., as before? Will the people still allow the agencies to run their lives? Will the people still obey and comply? What if that has already happened? What if the government lies first about its own existence? If the agencies aren't constitutional in the first place and aren't accountable to the people, how were they ever part of our government? And what then is our government? Okay, so the false reality layer on top of our base layer constitutional republic can still exist even while it's separated from the government. Trump can cut these executive branch agencies off in every possible way, and they can still exist. They can just simply privatize themselves. Okay? And then work as the CDC, funded by big pharma and philanthropists, that still advises the nation on health and how to avoid disease. And they will still be seen as the experts on disease by everyone who's anti-Trump or normie or a statist or a groveler. And it turns out there are a lot of statists and grovelers within MAGA. And so when their state says, when they create a new pandemic, hey, the CDC says you have to wear 2 masks. And then the state, the governor in a state like California, for instance, says to the people, the CDC recommends that you wear 2 masks. So California is going to put a mask mandate policy in place for this county, this county, this county, this county, this county. And all the county officials they know are already going to enforce the mandate they put in place. And then because they get to hold the business licenses over the businesses, they can force the businesses to put those mandates in place. And then the people who want to use those businesses will be told by those businesses, hey, wear a mask. And the other people that are customers of that business will tell the people without the masks, hey, put on your mask. And you'll say, why? I don't have to do that. Well, the CDC says so, and California has a state mandate, and this business requires it in order to keep their business license. So therefore, you need to wear a mask. The CDC says. What difference would it make whether or not the CDC is part of the government? What difference would it make? It's impossible to detect a difference that it would make. So therefore, if there is no difference that it would make, and that situation is the same as this situation that we're in now, what does it mean that Trump will dismantle that agency and move it outside of the federal government? And I would say that it might not mean much. Of course, this is already the situation that we've had for the last few years, because we can see that these organizations are being funded by outside sources. Here's the thing. They're linked into our military, aren't they? Or at least the Department of Defense and the Pentagon. So we got a problem there as well. But what I am suggesting is that if all our federal agencies are like this, and the truth is that many of them are, then the administrative state, the false reality layer of our government, can exist entirely separate from the government onto which it is a parasite, but doesn't need to be a parasite, because the global regime and the philanthropists will continue funding all those quasi-governmental organizations the same way that they already fund NGOs. Okay? And then at the point where they reject the people's candidate through fake elections, once Donald Trump is no longer around, well, then they just move those privatized agencies right back into the federal government, or just reform those connections, which they may not even need to do, because the federal government as it exists on the regime fiat dollar, implementing the regime agenda, the uniparty agenda, already has ways of paying everybody. Okay? They don't need any of the things that the Supreme Court is taking away, or that Donald Trump might take away, to continue to do the same jobs that they're doing, especially if the states and the people continue to respect those agencies as, you know, the experts. They don't need anything else. They really can just keep their system going. Does the regime seem like the Great Reset has been destroyed? Well, there's certainly a deglobalization going on, and we can hope that that is being initiated, executed, carried out by the BRICS nations in what might be called a sovereign alliance, what might be called the emergence of the multipolar world order. And we can hope that Donald Trump is aligned with that thing in opposition to those global regime banks. But if he's not, that would be very bad. Now, I don't believe that he is. He was the catalyst of this great awakening to the extent that there is one. So he deserves credit and the benefit of the doubt endlessly for that. But if what we are going to be left with after Trump is hold on, let me get this picture back, is JD Vance and then these guys. Well, I would say that is a nightmare scenario. And I'm talking about the lineup of speakers at Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA Shillfest 2024 in late December, as we discussed yesterday or the other day. I think yesterday. Some of these are good people, as I said. Some of them are clearly not. And what will be left if the people have gone back to sleep and Donald Trump has left us, and what we have in his place are the people who have benefited from this info op and essentially used Donald Trump and MAGA as a skin suit to just continue advancing the same Con Inc. or uniparty agenda that they were advancing before. All right. Now, I don't mean this to be any sort of black pill thing, but we got to keep our eyes on the prize here and not pretend that we actually just thwarted the Great Reset after the television says Donald Trump won a fake election. The television literally could not say anything else and prevent a people's revolt. Okay. And we've been talking about this for years, so I don't need to rehash all of it. But man, oh man, everybody wants to go back to sleep as fast as possible. And I get the urge, you know. Man, sorry, got a little notification from my pal Seth Keschel, having seen a post earlier that mentioned him. Okay, let's continue forward because I want to flesh this idea out a little bit more because, you know, I don't want to, I know there's some important stuff going on right now, narratively speaking, and I don't want to ignore that stuff or pay short shrift to it, you know. And here, let's talk about one thing quickly before we continue on down that same path. Donald Trump this afternoon named Keith Kellogg, here's the post, Truth Social, General Keith Kellogg, a real general, not one of those TV generals. Trump says, I am very pleased to nominate General Keith Kellogg to serve as assistant to the president and special envoy for Ukraine and Russia. Keith has led a distinguished military and business career, including serving in highly sensitive national security roles in my first administration. He was with me right from the beginning. Together, we will secure peace through strength and make America and the world safe again. So with Donald Trump right from the beginning, pardon me for a moment, I have to sneeze. Oh, yeah. Okay. So he was with Trump right from the beginning. And the beginning, for most people who have spent significant time investing, who have invested significant time in understanding, I should say, the Trump era from before Trump came down the escalator, Keith Kellogg has been with him from that time, is what he's saying. Keith Kellogg seems like a great man. And to the extent that our analysis is correct, and by our, I mean the broader community, not even myself, I was a latecomer to all of that. To the extent that analysis is correct, Keith Kellogg has been a key figure throughout this time. So Keith Kellogg operating in that arena is wonderful news. He would be the opposite to the regime and the uniparty handling Russia-Ukraine stuff. At the same time, we should remember that Putin did not stage a very brutal invasion to take over Ukraine and overthrow their very sovereign democracy. All right. None of that is what actually happened. So we need to be mindful of that when analyzing what's being done. We don't want to see Russia-Ukraine wound down as though all of this was real. At some point, you know, the cast has to come out and take a bow so that the story, this narrative, this nonsense that we are constantly subjected to eventually ends. The PSYOP to unwind the PSYOP is an entirely sensible construct and one that I am comfortable with on many levels, though not all levels. The PSYOP to unwind the PSYOP that never ends is just an alternative PSYOP. Okay. And no one should be comfortable with that. All right. But let's get back to this particular line of thinking. And before we do that, I just want to share this. I don't want to belabor the Kamabla comeback video, but this is No Name's daughter insulting the video. Meghan McCain says, take this down. She's still the sitting vice president, for God's sake. This is awful. Like really, really awful. And the Democrats had posted that video message. So even No Name's shill, normie, regime, uniparty supporting, totally corrupted daughter thinks Kamabla looks bad in that video. And pardon me. Oh man, I don't know if I'm allergic to something in this office, but I sneeze more frequently here. A couple more weeks, and then maybe my sneeze will be cured. Okay, so here we go. Let's move to this post on X, formerly Twitter, from Liz Churchill, posting a video of the climate czar and former failed presidential candidate, communist, and someone who seems like his entire life very, very, let's say, blessed life is about to come to an end in some way. And I'm not suggesting violence in any way. I'm just suggesting he will be held accountable for his crimes against humanity and probably be detached from his and his wife's fortune. And of course, his wife is Teresa Heinz, who is the heir of the Heinz ketchup and mustard condiment fortune, formerly had their names on the stadium of the Pittsburgh Steelers, although they no longer do. Here is Communist John Kerry.
So I think personally, we're on the brink of needing to declare a climate emergency, which is what we really have. And we need to get people to behave as if this really is a major transitional challenge to the whole planet, to everybody. People in Africa don't have electricity, need to choose the right kinds of electricity. And we need to help them be able to afford it and do it. We are the largest economy in the world, $24 trillion or $23 trillion economy, maybe more by now. The next closest is China at about 18 trillion. And the next closest to the two of us, Germany and Japan at 4 trillion. That's how far it drops down. You don't think we have some sort of obligation out of that to be responsible? I think you do. But I'm just saying that our country needs to talk about this. And we need to make it happen because we're paying huge sums of money to make up the difference.
So we're paying huge sums of money for the rest of the world to be on board with the climate change agenda. And they don't have any plans on stopping. It doesn't seem like John Kerry has any plans on stopping, does it? Certainly doesn't seem that way to me. That is a lot of power they are still demanding. Let's continue on that same path. Donald Trump is playing the opposite note. This is from the Daily Caller yesterday. Trump will redirect billions in unspent funds from Biden's climate law to real infrastructure. President-elect Donald Trump is planning to redirect unspent Inflation Reduction Act funding to spending on infrastructure. Trump will rapidly defeat inflation and bring down all prices by ending the Democrats' anti-energy crusade, which will cut energy prices in half during his first 12 months in office. This statement from Caroline Levitt. He will also terminate the Green New scam and rescind all unspent funds from the so-called Inflation Reduction Act and redirect them to spending on real infrastructure. As the Biden-Harris administration rushes to formally obligate tens of billions in IRA funding before Biden leaves office, President-elect Trump is moving forward with plans to repeal the IRA and redirect all leftover spending from Biden's climate law to spending on infrastructure. The incoming Trump administration's vow to reprogram remaining IRA funding could face legal challenges due to restrictions on reallocation within the congressional appropriations, and failure to spend as Congress directed would violate a Nixon-era budget law that forces the executive branch to spend money appropriated by Congress. So once again, we have an example, and then they advertise Tucker Carlson's podcast with Russ Vought, and that might be a totally worthwhile listen. Russ Vought is the man nominated to be the head of the Office of Management and Budget once again, so probably has a bunch of interesting things to say about this. I will probably try to find time to listen to that myself, because I think that Russ Vought is an interesting character and potentially a main character who we should pay attention to. So good on you, Tucker. Thank you for doing an extended interview with Russ Vought. Now, as far as Donald Trump goes, I would suggest that issues like this might be playing out specifically so they can be challenged in court, so that it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. And we can see whether or not laws like this from the 1970s, from the Nixon era, that tried to take power away from the president and how the executive branch would operate are actually valid. And we talked about this at length yesterday, so I don't need to go back into it. But you can't just Congress can't just usurp the authority of the president in the execution of the executive branch's functions. And I'm more than happy for the Supreme Court to weigh in on that. So I hope it is moved quickly all the way up. The Inflation Reduction Act has not reduced inflation. And even the communists say that it is only a climate change act. Let us continue. We have been talking about transition issues with the federal government. Actually, you know what? Let's go in this direction. All right, we'll just stick with the topic of the environment for a second before we get to that next thing. So this is Elon on X, formerly Twitter, on November 24th. So that would have been Sunday. He said the inmates run the asylum in a response to an account called Premier Requel or something. After you've read enough about how civil servants stopped Trump from governing, it's hard not to imagine what Biden's administration is doing at the OPM is at least un-American and maybe evil. Consider how career lawyers at the EPA simply refused to tell Trump what the agency was doing. And he cites this little paragraph, not a source as far as I can tell. Career attorneys in the EPA did not inform political appointees about major cases the agency was involved in or the government's positions in pending cases. Political appointees had to monitor public court filings to learn what the agency was doing. Okay. And we see lots of FOIA requests from organizations like America First Legal and Judicial Watch. They are Trump adjacent. America First Legal is basically the Trump administration during this pause term, and then will be more a formal part of the Trump organization or administration in the next term. And let's just go there quickly. America First Legal. Look at some of the Let's look at some of the personnel in America First Legal. There's Stephen Miller, Gene Hamilton, Reed Rubenstein, Daniel Epstein. This is not, where are we? About leadership. Come on, why doesn't it give me all of the people? I found this the other day. Maybe it was the America First Policy Institute. Apologies, hold for processing. So AFPI. And on this, we can find their team. There we are. Okay, this is the page I wanted. These are people who worked in the last Trump administration and or this Trump administration, this incoming, And this is all the people who have been here, obviously, during this pause period. Linda McMahon, Brooke Rollins, Chad Wolf was the former DHS secretary. Who else do we have in this upcoming administration that we've been told about so far? Isn't it amazing also how non-communist these people look? None of these people look like communists. I wonder what an equivalent organization would be on the Democrat side. Maybe if someone thinks of a good one, we can go look at that. All staff. Let's just go to all staff, because there are some more. Pam Bondi right there. Where else do we have people? And if I missed some names here, apologies. Doug Collins, next administration. Where else here? I know that there are a couple more. Jill Holman, no relation to Tom. Bobby Jindal, I didn't know he was still around. Very interesting. These people do not look like communists. There's Keith Kellogg, Alveda King up there, Robert Lighthizer. Anyhow, even Kayleigh McEnany's sister is involved. So that says something certainly about Kayleigh McEnany's position over at Fox News, or it says something about the America First Policy Institute, and maybe there's some, oh, wow. Oh, no, that's not Preston Para. Huh, interesting. Okay, so that's enough of looking at that. We can continue. They have a much bigger staff than I saw the other day. But there are a number of people in here that were either in the first Trump administration or are in the third Trump administration. And in the meantime, they were the AFPI, working outside of government, separate in some way. John Drake says, media matters. Let's find out. Media matters. I wonder if they will show us what their team looks like. Oh, look at that. Right on their front page, they're mad at Russ Vaught. News and Analysis Archives. Where's the about for Media Matters? Here we are. Let's see. Give us the team. Give us the team. Here's the leadership. Oh, man. No pictures. All right. Forget this. That experiment never worked. We'll chalk that one up as a failure. Politico from Sunday. Trump team barred from agencies amid legal standoff. Advisors to RFK Jr. reached out to the HHS department multiple times after Donald Trump tapped him to lead the massive agency, hoping to jumpstart coordination before his takeover in late January. They were rebuffed. Kennedy's inability to communicate with the agency he may soon manage, confirmed by an administration official with knowledge of the episodes, granted anonymity to describe internal deliberations, is just one consequence of the president-elect's continued foot-dragging on signing the standard trio of ethics and transparency agreements with the federal government, something his team pledged to do shortly after the election. So, the Trump transitions, let's just do one more paragraph. The Trump transition's unprecedented delay in signing the agreements has so far prevented the incoming administration from having any formal contact with federal agencies, including sending in groups of policy advisors known as landing teams. It also means they can't access cybersecurity support, or secure email servers for transition-related work, or request FBI background checks for their nominees. So on both sides, access to the transition team is being restricted from these federal government agencies, okay? So the false reality layer, the administrative state agencies in the federal government bureaucracy are not allowing Trump's team to access their resources or information. The claim is that they're not allowing that access due to Trump's refusal to sign these agreements. And the result is that the members of Trump's transition team incoming are not able to access information. So we have two parties affected here that aren't directly Donald Trump, okay? Now, is it possible that the fantasy sports following the fake election are part of the same psyop and ruse, and that some of these people being nominated to serve in these federal government administrations that need to be eliminated or will be privatized, is it possible that some of those people aren't as based and red-pilled and pro-Trump as people in MAGA are, I guess, promoting? Yes, that's entirely possible. You cannot deny the possibility of something like that happening. And this is kind of what I was discussing last night with Burning Bright on Badlands Story Hour, as we discussed the concept of drafting in Days of Thunder. And let me see if I already deleted that video. We'll leave that alone. Anyway, the idea is that this parasite, and in Days of Thunder, it is a back car, is basically getting a free ride by being close to the bumper of a lead car that is taking all of the air resistance and essentially doing all of the work, okay? So the back car is not using any of its own resources, or fewer of its own resources, as it leeches off the lead car. And at some point, it's going to make its own move where it deploys its own resources to bypass the lead car and thus, kill the parasite, kills the host and takes over, okay? So are there people in organizations, is the Republican establishment still attempting to do that with Donald Trump? Yes, the answer obviously has to be yes. So who are those people doing it? And could some of those people be appointed to positions in the Trump administration just as they were in 2016 and 2017? You cannot possibly rule that out. And because it would be one of the most desirable strategies for the enemy, you have to assume it's happening. So then the question becomes, who are these people? Now, I suspect it's probably not Robert F. Kennedy Jr., but maybe it is, or maybe it's people that are under HHS in some of these other agencies and, parts of the bureaucracy, and their access to information must be restricted. So which side is restricting the information? Maybe Donald Trump is refusing to sign the agreements because he doesn't want access to that information for the people who might be serving in his quote unquote incoming administration. That is entirely possible. And we should not discount possibilities just because we don't like where they might lead. And where they might lead is always to the understanding that the game has not been won yet. Okay. The game is not over. People don't like to contend with that idea, even though they already know it's true. Okay. Admitting it is definitely not the worst part. The worst part is that sneaking suspicion that something is always wrong while you are ignoring it. That is always the most stressful thing. Facing the problem and dealing with the problem as it exists is always less stressful. And that is a good lesson in life, by the way, one that I try to adhere to because I've learned it many times before, but don't always adhere to because I'm not perfect. So I'm not saying this in any judgmental way, but it is always better to acknowledge that these things might still be problems and that the fake election of November 5th didn't actually solve all of these problems. That very real election that we had, according to Joe Rogan. Good God, man. It really is unbelievable. Even if you don't think that he's trying to trick people, at some point, you have to understand it is dangerous that he still has his reputation and speaks to 11 million people and disseminates this level of retardation. At some point, that can only be bad. And he doesn't need to be defended while he's doing it, especially not by us. Holy shit. Both the Trump transition and the Trump White House confirmed to Politico that negotiations on the agreements are still underway. But until the standoff is resolved, Trump's cabinet nominees will gain no more insight than the general public into the workings of the departments they're supposed to run. Again, that might indicate that they won't be running them. Maybe they'll just eliminate them, or maybe they don't need the information because the people operating in those departments weren't actually operating in any way that affected the federal government. So that separation is going to exist. Donald Trump doesn't need to deal with that side of it if he already has all their information, because all the information is all anyone would ever need to deal with that problem. And when I say Donald Trump in that sense, I mean Trump and everyone else around him in the real way, not the optical way, not specifically just Trump himself, as if Trump is just going to go through the pages and pages of employee emails at one of these departments. Watchdog groups, ethics experts, and former government officials say the delay in coordination with federal agencies, which typically begins by mid-November, means the new administration won't be up to speed on the state of the career workforce and budget and what headaches may await them when Trump takes the oath of office on January 20th. The failure thus far to sign the memorandums has also troubled Biden officials who are particularly concerned about the potential national security implications. So it's worrying them, and it's worrying the normies and the regime and the uniparty and their media. Trump won't be up to speed. How is he going to operate this massive, complicated system if his transition never actually starts? I guess that's the question. They won't be up to speed on the state of the career workforce and budget and what headaches may await them. Okay? So the career workforce, are they staying in their jobs or are they leaving their jobs? The answer, of course, is that they are, in large part, leaving their jobs. They will not have jobs anymore. And the truth is, many of them haven't had jobs for the last few years. A lot of them went home for COVID and never went back to the office. And they may have collected a check for a couple of years to do no work. And that's already true. That's a main discussion on X, formerly Twitter, right now. So if they left work and they haven't come to the office and they haven't done any work and they have gotten paid the entire time and they have not bothered getting into the private sector, and then we are told their jobs are ended, were their jobs ended with a years-long severance period or not? That'll be the question. Were their jobs already ended? Did they need, as a condition of their multiple years of continued pay, need to make arrangements for that? Now, I'm just laying out a plausible possibility, okay? Because eventually we're going to have to look at some of these things and try to reset our informational timelines and figure out where some of this stuff actually happened. And we've talked about that with some of the social media and tech stuff. We just discussed that the other day, talking about Google Chrome potentially being divested, okay? So hopefully to none of you are these ideas actually new. If these ideas are new to you, go through the last few weeks of the podcast and catch up, or start much further back. I always tell people who are just coming to the podcast new, start further back, okay? So you know some of what we're generally talking about here. Because I understand that it's not attached in many ways to the common political conversation that most people are familiar with. But if their jobs will no longer exist in the future and will have a severance package attached to them when they are ended, but they already stopped doing their jobs years ago and have gotten paid the whole time, then did that thing already happen? Okay? And it's something that we at least have to think about and acknowledge as possible, because that same pattern is probably going to repeat over and over and over and over again. throughout the stories we see about the reduction in size and scope of the federal government, and we are going to have to recognize it when we see it to blast ourselves up closer to real time so that we can interact with a more beneficial informational timeline and make our judgments according to the closest to real time possible informational timeline. All right. That's the goal, so that we can make good decisions relative to reality as best we can detect it, rather than what we are told by the television in something we know to be an informational past. They will lie about the facts of events. They will lie about the meanings we are meant to derive from the facts of those events. And they will try to distort our understanding of the timing of those events, so that even if we are able to pick out which things are untrue and what the proper meaning is, we will already be delayed so far on an informational timeline that we will never be able to catch up. And they will still have the ability to exploit us on the basis of time alone. Okay? That's how the informational time machine operates. If you don't want to use the informational time machine to your benefit, then it will be used against you. Okay? All right. I can't remember whether or not there is anything worth coming back to in this article. It is basically just a restating. Let's just jump down to the end. Okay, let's jump down to the end. Trump's decision so far to forego federal transition assistance and cooperation is unprecedented in the modern presidential system. Kamala signed all 3 federal memorandums with the General Services Administration, the White House, and the Justice Department before the November election. Trump's team did as well the first time he ran in 2016, and Joe Biden's did in 2020. And we heard this from the Washington Post in almost the exact same language last week. Holding off on signing the agreements has freed the Trump transition from having to abide by blah, blah, blah. Amid an uptick in hacking this year, blah, blah, blah. The public remains in the dark about potential ethical and financial entanglements. Oh no, the FBI doesn't have a chance to make some shit up. Until they sign this agreement, they're not yet government employees. They can do anything they want. They can have conflicts of interest they want, any conflicts of interest they want. They could be taking money from foreign governments for all we know, said Richard Painter, the chief White House ethics lawyer in the George W. Bush administration. Trump and his team need to convince the American people, including the people who voted for them, that they're not working to help, that they're working to help the country, not just making a bunch of billionaires even richer. Not signing these agreements is a great way to tell all those working class voters, thank you very much. Now, F you. All right, Richard Painter, you guys have tried that for 9 years. Working class voters don't believe you. And you telling them again is not going to make them believe you. So, give it up. That is ridiculous. No one is buying that bullshit. But the idea that they are not government employees until they sign those agreements, once again, is preposterous. Trump can hire and fire executive branch employees, appoint secretaries, and do all of that without the oversight of the Government Services Administration. Okay? It doesn't matter at all. Richard Painter is simply lying or obfuscating at best. He might be able to point to statutes or laws that are clearly unconstitutional but have not been challenged and removed, as they will soon be, probably from a fight like this. But there's absolutely nothing these people can do. And their government is not the important government. That false reality layer can be ignored completely by the legitimate constitutional Republican president, the actual president of the United States of America. And hey, maybe by the Articles of Confederation, but probably not that just yet. By the Constitution, Donald Trump, the commander-in-chief of the military and the president of the United States of America, does not need to concern himself with the false reality layer for any of his legitimacy or the legitimacy of his administration. Okay? It's all nonsense. He doesn't need to do any of this bullshit. They just want him to do this bullshit because it is a measure of their control. And we should see it that way forever going forward. Now, let us continue here with these poor federal employees. And again, I always like to make sure to remind people that I am not anti-federal employee, okay? Not across the board. I am certain that there are some people who go to work every day thinking they have a great job and they're doing a good thing and they work as hard as they can and they're competent, etc. Okay? At some point, I think probably working in government, some things should sound like they're off. And I think a lot of people have ignored all of those signals, and that's its own kind of problem. And at some point, there's probably going to be a reckoning with that, if not just in people's own personal morality, then in a public sense. And I think that I hope that there's not a whole lot of personal fallout, because I don't want people who are just trying to do good things that they thought were good and have families to be punished. But, things don't become this corrupt by accident. And if the corrupt system is going to keep going on and no one's questioning the system, well, that just kind of makes people complicit by default. And so that's not a great place to be. And I feel for these people, but the solution is to be really honest and upfront and maybe become a whistleblower about the things and then move quickly into retirement or into the private sector. All right. These are not dependable jobs, and telling people that they should feel bad about wanting the federal government reduced at the expense of employees that's not going to sell a whole lot of people on the idea. And again, I really believe that we are probably looking at a situation where people have gotten their severance. They have not been working. The agencies have been abandoned, the buildings. Elon Musk, I think I said the other day, Elon Musk posted about, and Vivek posted about something like 8,000 federal government owned buildings that no one is in at all. Like they just lie empty, and their utility bills are still being paid, the rent or the purchase or the tax or whatever it is on them, the federal government taxing itself, whatever. But whatever expenses are involved with that building are still being paid despite the building being empty. If 8,000 federal government buildings are empty and the employees are working remotely and not actually working, and they're still receiving pay, I would suggest that maybe the federal government was taken apart totally in 2020 when Donald Trump said he left office, according to that chart. Okay. And they all went home. They worked remotely. They didn't actually do any work. They got paid. How many of them just simply signed deals and said, yep, I won't say a word. Yeah, I understand that this agency is being completely taken apart, taken down. Give me that few years severance. I won't say a word. Is that where we are? Were those people then also told that if they keep playing along with the other side, they will have jobs in the future? We're in a strange world. These possibilities should not simply be discounted. Okay. You can think I'm crazy. I am all good with that. All good with it. I would rather be ahead of trends like these with all of the possibilities on the table than be watching Doge play out on Twitter and clapping along like a retard. I would rather be this kind of retard that is looking ahead and saying, hey, it might be this. I might be wrong, but it might be this. If no one presents possibilities, then those possibilities are ignored completely. And then retroactively, when someone says, hey, I think that thing happened, everyone's just like, oh, that's a conspiracy theory, man. We know what happened. We watched it all happen. Did you watch it happen? I'm watching this happen. Okay. I'm watching this thing happen, as the devolution guys have talked about for 4 years, twice a week. That's the thing I'm watching happen. That thing still hasn't gone off track as far as I'm concerned. I didn't see anybody else. Calling the exact narrative operation that would happen after that election and before that election a year in advance. So maybe there's something to this school of thought. Just saying. and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, man, but the alternatives, honestly, if I can't make a case against the alternatives at this point, because I am concerned about things like humility, there is a much bigger project at stake here and at play than how I am looked at by the public and whether or not I am perceived to have humility. Because if the thing that I think might be happening is happening, then we need a whole lot of other people with their eyes on that and participating in it. Because I'm not going to figure it all out for myself. And even if I did figure it all out, I'm not going to be able to like be the people's stand-in for all of it. And neither are the collection of other people who are on this ride with me. I'm not trying to isolate myself or single myself out or anything like that. I'm just saying that if this other thing is happening, then other people need to be analyzing it and working on that problem, because it is a problem that right now the Q community in its Q-ness isn't embracing. Okay. And so I don't know who else is going to be ahead of that thing. I mean, they're the guys who are ostensibly supposed to be ahead. But of course, that plan ends at some point unless Q comes back. And if Q comes back, how are people going to even receive it? Will it seem real at this point? Let's do this one, and maybe we'll just leave it here for today on this. This is Newsweek from Monday. State Department faces questions over reported counseling after Trump win. The U.S. State Department, so this is the branch of government that is in the executive administration to be a liaison with the CIA, the intelligence apparatus of the global regime. So basically, the presidential administration gets the information that they must believe in from the global regime via the CIA and the State Department up to the president. And then the State Department communicates through the CIA to the global regime about everything the administration is doing. What a good relationship we have, State Department. The department allegedly held therapy sessions for employees after Trump won. Darrell Issa, Republican from California, criticized Secretary of State Antony Blinken over the sessions, the therapy sessions. It has not been confirmed whether the sessions took place. Oh, earlier this month, Trump secured victory, blah, blah, blah. In a letter to Blinken obtained by the Washington Free Beacon. Well, wait a second. Why don't we just go over to the Washington Free Beacon? And where is, that's so annoying that they don't link right there. Issa criticized the alleged therapy sessions. I am concerned that the department is catering to federal employees who are personally devastated by the normal functioning of American democracy through the provision of government-funded mental health counseling, because Kamala Harris was not elected president of the United States. So that is how deeply, deeply infiltrated your government is, I think, is the takeaway here. Issa added, it is disturbing that ostensibly nonpartisan government officials would suffer a personal meltdown over the results of a free and fair election, something the United States champions around the world. And this must be tongue-in-cheek. In the letter, the representative asked Blinken a series of questions, including how many sessions have been conducted, how many were planned, and how much they cost the department. Issa's letter followed a November 11th report from the Free Beacon that detailed an alleged 1-hour therapy session held by the State Department. The report, which cited 4 sources with knowledge of the meeting, also said another session was scheduled for November 13th. So their feelings are very, very hurt by Trump winning. That, my friends, is hilarious. Where are we here? So, here it is. Actually, you know what? We're going to do one more piece. This was definitely part of what I intended to talk about today. I cannot skip over it. It is so amazing because I think it is just additional support to the case I've been making, a case that I began making before the election as we went through a lot of some of the panic stories, the horror stories about what would happen after the election, where people would have to flee the country to, what sort of people would be having to flee the country, what sort of people had dual citizenship, and what would happen to the federal agencies. This is Politico from the 20th. So 1 week ago, last Wednesday. This is Gina Raimundo with this strange face. Raimundo's urgent mission: leave no cash for Trump. This is something we discussed before the election. The agencies would be attempting to spend the entirety of their budgets, figuring out ways to spend money, aka waste money, by sending it to people they were aligned with. And you can imagine that money is going to setting up the privatized versions of these agencies. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimundo is on an urgent mission. Get as much high-tech spending out the door before Donald Trump takes office. The Biden administration is aiming to commit nearly every unspent dollar in the $50 billion microchip subsidy program before President-elect Donald Trump takes over in January, an effort that would effectively cement a massive industrial legacy before the GOP can reverse course. So the people have made their priorities known, and the uniparty regime is basically just giving the fat middle finger to the American people and saying, we don't care that you spoke out strongly against what we're doing. We're going to do it anyway. And the thing that we are going to do the hardest is waste your money by spending it on things you just told us you didn't want. I'd like to have really almost all of the money obligated by the time we leave, Raimundo said in an interview with Politico. That's the goal. And I certainly want to have all the major announcements done as it relates to the big leading edge companies. The effort to spend our department's full CHIPS Act budget would put a capstone on a signature Biden economic policy. And again, the CHIPS thing, just to be clear, is not only Biden-ish, it's also very Trump-ish. So remember all of this, grain of salt, some perspective. It also speaks to the urgency facing a host of Biden's historic raft of spending programs, many of which could be vulnerable to a Republican White House and Congress eager to pare back the most ambitious Democrat spending packages. The CHIPS money alone is a massive undertaking. Congress allocated $50 billion in subsidies for semiconductor manufacturing and R&D. So far, only 2 companies have received binding awards from the Department of Commerce's manufacturing program. To hit her target, Raimundo still needs to nail down contracts with Intel, Micron, Samsung, and SK Hynix, multi-billion-dollar deals that have at times been rocky and required renegotiations. Is she going to get it done? Raimundo said she recently directed staff to work through the weekend and even made personal calls to tech CEOs to speed the talks along. The forthcoming change in administration is a clear deadline that focuses the mind, Raimundo said, but added she's not overly concerned about federal budget-conscious Republicans clawing back money from the program next year, despite their threats to do so. And why wouldn't she be? Well, because it is part of the Trump agenda. Though she didn't specifically make predictions about Trump and was interviewed before Lutnick was named, her end-of-term agenda is clearly shaped by the looming presence of the next president. The looming presence of the next president. There we go. The Commerce Department is somewhat unique insofar as everything we've done and are doing is bipartisan, and the CHIPS Act is a national security program and still has great bipartisan support to this day. And of course, every time we see the word bipartisan, we should read unipartisan. Let me just jump to this Trump section here. Here it is. Oh, I did highlight it. Whether Trump will stay the course on AI policy, Raimundo said, look, I can't predict what the next president will do, and so I'm not going to speculate on who might do what. on why Trump might stay the course anyway. In less than a year under President Biden's leadership, we have made a remarkable amount of progress in a bipartisan way, I should note, to start to define what are the standards to keep us safe. And by the way, we're doing this in partnership with the private sector. Oh, good. You know, when I'm here in San Francisco, I will be meeting with entrepreneurs, startup CEOs, venture capital investors, and also some of the big hyperscalers. Sounds like, again, they're trying to set up their own apparatus outside of the federal government. They want something that is completely separate from Trump's influence. So this isn't really about us doing something to industry to slow them down, right? That's not what this is about. What this is about is fundamentally setting up the guardrails and standards to keep us all safe, to prevent, in fact, pernicious models getting in the hands of terrorists or non-state actors who could use it to proliferate chemical warfare. Nobody wants that to happen. The next administration doesn't want that to happen. No country in the world wants that to happen. So are they going to put their stamp on the way to do this? I am sure every president does that. I submit to you that they are trying to build or at least maintain their parallel structure once that parallel structure is very clearly publicly seen to be not part of the legitimate federal government, which it has not been in reality for a while. Okay? They are not going to want to tell people that. It'll just eventually become clear and it will be undeniable. And it will go on like that as the people still believe, oh, the CDC, they're still part of the federal government. I mean, what branches of the false reality layer of the federal government will they not be able to continue? The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, various funding mechanisms. I would say the Fed, but I think the Fed has already been brought back under Treasury. That is what we are led to understand. But if that weren't true, what would stop them from operating with the banks? The law? They care about the law? They care about the Constitution? No, they don't care about that. And what if the banks simply decided to go along with them? How's the federal government going to stop them? You have to understand that these things can splinter and keep going in a very real way because we already live under an unconstitutional form of government. We've already submitted to the communist bureaucratic state. All right. So if it actually separates, no one's going to give a damn. They're just going to still grovel because they want the state and they want the apparatus of the state to rule their lives. They want to interact with the apparatus of the state because they're accustomed to it. Why wouldn't it continue? Nobody put anything in Q&A today, and maybe that's because people are just kind of chilled out on their holiday week. And so with that, I'm going to wrap things up here. I don't believe that there were any Rumble rants in the chat. Thank you all very much for hanging out. Thank you very much for your support of this podcast as it continues to grow and change and expand. And I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful Thanksgiving, whether or not you're with family. If you are not, and you are still doing Thanksgiving, it is your responsibility not to call it Friendsgiving and not to allow anyone else to either. Say, hey, friend, you sound vaccinated. And with that, I will be back on Friday, most likely. There's a chance it's Monday, but most likely Friday, same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
Well, what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
Ah!
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What must be what?
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/I'm your moderator. And I'll see you soon down on the range.